Good afternoon, folks. We're going to go ahead and get started, seeing as how the webcast is on now. Give folks are going to probably trickle in. So, um, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here for what, by all accounts, is shaping up to be a fun and exciting afternoon. Allow me to introduce myself. My name's Steven Sander. You can call me Steve. I'm currently acting supervisor in the Knowledge Integration Section, Policy Development and Analysis Office. Joining me today is our intrepid section manager, John Sitz. He's overseen the regulatory development process since its inception about 3 years ago, so we're lucky enough to be joined today by the expert on the regulations. You can't stump him, but you can try if you like. So. John, would you like to say a few
I
words?
just want to say welcome to this workshop. I hope it's will be a productive and useful one. I'm sure it will be. And welcome to all the people who are new to this. And be patient. We'll help you through it. And I'll turn it back over to Steve.
Yeah, thank you, John. So jumping right in, before we do that, let's take care of a few just housekeeping items. So in the event of a fire or another emergency, our relocation area will be Chavez Park, which is catty corner to this building. Follow me or follow John or Dan outside and out of the building, down the stairs, through the doors on the first floor in the plaza. It will go across the street. I don't think that will happen, but please follow the procedure. The meeting will be recorded and posted online as training material, so please do keep that in mind this afternoon. Restrooms are going to be out these doors in the back. Continue walking east. They'll be just around the corner there. We'll now very quickly go over some workshop guidelines, best practices for connecting with us remotely, and just a small disclaimer. Please hold your questions until the question and answer portion of each talk. We'll have a lot of material to cover, and I have to keep to the schedule. So there will be plenty of time for Q&A once I'm finished sort of spieling. Please use the microphones so that everyone in the room and the folks online can hear you. Please speak loudly and directly into the microphone. I'll interrupt you if I can't hear your question, and I'll ask you to please project your voice a bit more. In the event we cannot immediately answer your question here, we'll try to follow up offline. Again, remember the conversation's being recorded, so please be on your best behavior. Please listen actively, try to understand where folks are coming from with their questions. And lastly, we're all here to learn, so please treat others the way they want to be treated, at least for the duration of these proceedings. Thank you. So for my webcast participants, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Please send your succinct, straight to the point questions and answers directly related to the material being discussed to RDRS at calrecycle.ca.gov. If you submit a really long comment, we may try to paraphrase it for the audience. If you have a hyper-specific question that you think may just apply to you and your facility, or you would rather have us not read your comment or question out loud, we're happy to follow up offline too if you prefer. So once again, RDRS at calrecycle.ca.gov is the mailbox for this afternoon, as well as anytime you have questions about the RDRS system and our training and outreach efforts. Okay, so in a perfect world, I wouldn't feel obligated to do this, but out of an abundance of caution, I just want to make a few things clear in relation to the contents of this workshop. First of all, this is not legal advice. No one here speaking from CalRecycle as an attorney. Even though we developed the regulations, we're human beings, we're fallible. Well, speaking for myself anyway. I may, over the course of this afternoon, say something that may very well turn out not to correspond exactly with the regulatory requirements or may not pertain to your specific circumstance for reasons I don't know about. So please, I don't want to say don't take anything I have to say to heart, but at the same time, please understand that, look, mistakes happen. These rules and their specific application can get complicated. So please give a little latitude for that and make a little allowance, a little room for error, if you will. So with that in mind, this workshop should not supplant your own read-through of the regulations. Okay, so it is your obligation as a business to follow all applicable regulatory requirements that pertain to you. So I'm asking you to just please remain diligent in that regard. If you're the person who inputs data or oversees reporting for your company, please take some time to read through this and really understand it, especially if it looks like you're going to have you're going to be submitting quarterly reports to CalRecycle under RDRS. Someone at some point at the organization that y'all represent has to make a determination before April 30th as to whether or not you are a reporting entity in RDRS and therefore would need to register. Lastly, this training may become obsolete one day if the regulations or the data system change dramatically. And if that's the case, we'll make every effort to publish updated training and outreach material that replaces and updates the obsolete sections of the training. So with that in mind, here are 3 learning objectives for today's workshop. By the end of the workshop, you should be able to go back to your company or organization and tell them that you know how to do the following things. Number 1, I know if my facility has a reporting obligation, or if not, I know that I need to look it up and where I can go to do that. Number 2, I know what type of reporting entity under which I should register my facility or operation. Or if not, I know what I need to do to go research, and I know how to make that happen by April 30th. And then number 3, I know the basic procedure for how to enter RDRS and input required information. I know what information I need to do to track, and what information I need to track down in order to make that happen for my company. So without further ado, here's a copy of the agenda. And I see we're right about on schedule. So next we will cover some important background material and then discuss registration requirements for each reporting entity type required to report in RDRS. And then we'll take about a 10-minute break, come back, hopefully get a bit more hands-on and, dare I say, interactive. We'll get a bit more practical and down to earth anyway, moving away from the theoretical requirements and focusing on the mechanics of getting into the actual data system, accessing various the web interface that facilitates electronic reporting and recycling and disposal reporting. So we'll cruise around that site and discuss various possibilities and forms, fields, and features before bringing things back for a quick Q&A and opportunity to offer some final thoughts if anyone has had any breakthroughs or profound epiphanies. Okay, so let's take a deeper dive sort of into the impetus for why we're here today. So zooming out a bit, we'll talk about laws versus regulations or statutes and regulations and the history of how we arrived here today, just to sort of paint a picture for folks who may be less familiar, maybe only now hearing about this in this requirement to register. So we'll take a dive into the regulations, discuss what the regulations require in terms of information needing to be provided to CalRecycle. We'll discuss the benefits of the regulations and how we plan on fully implementing the new reporting system, transitioning away from the current disposal reporting system, also known as DRS or EDRS. So real quick, just on the statutes versus regulations. The statute that these RDRS reporting regulations are under is sections 41821.5 to 41821.8 of the Public Resources Code. And statutes, as you all know, are essentially bills that are passed by both state houses that operate just down the street here in Sacramento, that was signed into law, and then that require regulations to be adopted. Regulations take place, are adopted through an administrative law process. And so that's sort of the difference between statutes and regulations, at least for our purposes here, kind of a 20,000 foot overview of that topic. Okay. So here's the status quo disposal reporting system. As you can see, it's very complicated with information changing hands several times before being passed along to CalRecycle. Oh, you mean like the, isn't it like you go to the public notice page? Yeah. I think there was a question about sort of where to go to access this webcast. You go to CalRecycle's main website, and you go to broadcast or public meetings broadcasts. You can also just go directly to the video.calepa.ca.gov and then click on Recycling Disposal Reporting System. That will take you to this webcast that we're in right now. Great. So along comes Assembly Bill 901 in 2015 and says we're going to move away from all that to a new system of direct reporting to CalRecycle. AB 1103 further modified the Public Resources Code, section 41821.5, to require the department's regulations include food waste self-haulers. So that's the sort of the statute that authorized the regulations for why we're here today. Nothing that the regulations can do can expand or contract the statute. We have to essentially implement, exactly what's required in terms of the regulations as they're carried out. So in terms of the legislative intent, taking a look at the bill analyses associated with AB 901, there were essentially three main requirements. The first was to require disposal and recycling/composting facilities and operations to report directly to CalRecycle. The bill analysis highlighted that additional enforcement authority was needed due to significant late, inaccurate, and incomplete reporting in DRS. An intent highlighted in the bill analysis was for the department to be provided with similar tools given to the waste tire program to enforce compliance in the submission of these data. All right, let's take a moment and get a little interactive. So what I would like you to do is read this over, and we'll take a moment, maybe 15, 30 seconds. And then when we come back, just if you wouldn't mind sharing with us a key word or phrase that sticks out to you in this here statute. So we'll take one moment. Anybody want to volunteer, finished reading off for their thoughts? Well, I got one. The phrase prescribed by the department. That means that we have a lot of discretion with regard to how we want to collect these data. So that's essentially the solid waste side of things. That this is the requirement in statute that the department is to receive these reports from disposal facility operators and so on. Oh, yeah, sir, please.
With that one, the concern is, and to counties that request information. Some counties are more active than others, and different counties will have different requests, which puts a burden on facilities.
So the question was, the comment was from the gentleman was about counties requesting information from disposal facilities per this statute. And his remark was that some counties are more active in terms of what they require facilities to provide. Was that sort of the gist of it? So these regulations don't really govern, that aspect of it. There were no regulations that were developed that is sort of interpreted or made specific that sort of clause in that particular statute. So, as far as the format for which, counties are allowed to request these data from the disposal facilities, these particular regulations didn't, sort of serve to clarify that particular clause. So, to your point, it still remains a little bit vague what specifically it means to counties that request the information in a form prescribed by the department. So, we can sort of clarify.
However, the good news on that is when you report through the RDRS system, the data provided by disposal facilities will be available online for counties and jurisdictions to look at. So in essence, it will be available to them through our system. Now, counties have their own authority to request, and cities as well will request facilities to report all kinds of different things. But within the confines of these regs, the information that we require will be available online as well. But we can't standardize what counties ask for because they oftentimes have their own authority to ask for all kinds of different things.
Yes.
From disposal facilities, how does that apply to wastewater treatment?
The question from the gentleman was, how does the phrase disposal facility relate to wastewater treatment facility? So the short answer is it doesn't. Basically, wastewater treatment plants are regulated in these here regulations as recycling and composting facilities and operations. So they would fall sort of under that purview to the extent that they're selling or transferring organic intermediate products, one of which is biosolids. So we would consider that a recycling activity for the purposes of these regulations, not necessarily solid waste. To the extent that they generate solid waste that is destined for disposal, they would be treated just like a generator in that regard, as a place where that solid waste is initially collected and then sent to a disposal facility in some cases. Does that sort of help a little bit? Okay, well, we'll talk about disposal and wastewater treatment plants in a little bit more detail as the presentation goes on here. I want to just jump ahead and have y'all take a look at the next little subsection here, subsection B, which governs the recycling side of things. So this is brand new authority for the department. Well, technically we had the authority, but this sort of made it a lot more clear. So let's just take a moment and collect our thoughts with regard to this, and we'll come back in a little bit.
Just to reiterate, these slides and the presentation will be available online after this workshop is over.
All right. Any thoughts from folks on this?
There's some other regulation out there because some of the facilities are already doing this. We're already reporting what we're purchasing, how much we're purchasing per month on a month-to-month basis, but it's done on paper and emailed in to CalRecycle.
Oh, okay. I think what the gentleman was talking about was there may be already some existing reporting requirements about recycling, purchasing, and that sort of thing. Yeah, so I think I'm familiar, I think, with the state agency Buy Recycled campaign. So there are other reporting systems out there that, require information to be submitted to the department. To my knowledge, this is a brand new requirement in terms of recycling and facilities that, to this point haven't even really been regulated by us. Folks who don't have a solid waste facility permit and so on. So this is really sort of new territory, and there may be some other reporting by to the local government or other government agencies, but I don't think we have required this information to be submitted, at least in this format and in this sort of way, in terms of anytime the material leaves the facility, whether it's being sold, transferred, disposed, that's sort of the level that or flow that will sort of concern within these here regulations.
Well, and also there are lots of reports by lots of different entities, whether it's the local enforcement agencies or jurisdictions or counties who also require information to be submitted to them. So this is separate from all of those requirements as well.
And I just want to ensure that I understand the obligation of a recycling operation would end once it tracks the transfer from itself to the next entity. It wouldn't continue having to track that if that entity then passed those materials on. It would stop at one, correct?
It would stop as soon as the material leaves, your possession, or as soon as you're done with the material, it's out of your hands. In other words, there's no requirement that it be further tracked as it moves through other folks' facilities or that sort of thing. It's when it basically leaves your site or your control, or you don't determine the destination of it, it's basically out of your hands once it's gone. So
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great. I'm just going to move on to the next one here. We're going to sort of do the same exercise, and hopefully I'll elicit a little bit more participation. Anybody have any preliminary thoughts, or pretty straightforward? Yes, please, sir.
This is sort of just generally when let's say a recyclable leaves a facility and it's reported, obviously that's going to be counted for purposes of diversion. I assume what you also want to do is track how it goes. But is there a danger of double counting that by doing that, or is there something in the system that says once we count it for purposes of being out of the waste site, it's only counted once? That's the first reason to do this. The second is to find out where it goes. Are there protections in the system to keep it from being counted more than one time?
So to your point, I think firstly about it being additive in terms of diversion,
Right.
I don't think we're going to be summing the total tons of recyclables that flowed, that were captured in the system, and then using that for any calculation about statewide recycling rate or anything like that. So it's not going to, and it's not going to count in terms of us giving diversion credit to jurisdictions, and it's not designed to be set up in that fashion. It's sort of designed more so just to, broadly speaking, track the flows of recyclables as they move around the state. We're not currently putting this on, attaching this to any particular metric. So in terms of the double counting, I think John wants to add to this, but generally speaking, when the material leaves a facility, it's, there's a destination involved. So that, I think there are provisions in there to tackle the double counting aspect of things.
Yeah, so just to follow up with that, when we do look at like what's going on statewide, we wouldn't be looking at each flow to and from each facility so much as looking at the places where materials exit the system. So it's exported out of the state, it goes to an end user, it's disposed. That type of final action is something we can look at and sum up. Going from facility to facility can't be.
Does that help with your question? Okay, great. All right. Just don't want to belabor this too much. So essentially, well, just the last point on this, similar to one that we just sort of went over in terms of types, quantities, destinations of material sold, disposed of, sold, or transferred. And then it was AB 1103 that amended this subsection that added this bit about the self-hauler definition and requirements as far as food waste self-haulers. Yes, the gentle lady in the back here.
I'm just curious how you're going to let all the self-haulers or determine which self-haulers are required to report. Because that could be a large amount of people that have never dealt with any regulations whatsoever.
Yeah, so we 100% agree with you. I don't want to spoil it, but that's gonna come soon. So we'll make sure to talk about that. We definitely want to keep that in mind for next time. And we do have similar sympathies with regard to the self-haulers out there in terms of not being in our wheelhouse to date. So, but we'll talk about that.
But on this slide, I do want to emphasize that it says at a minimum, it's a person that does the following things with food waste. And our regulations implement this statute at the minimum. We don't include every self-hauler. We use the very narrowly defined one here.
Right. Thank you, John, for being explicit about that. Yeah, the intent wasn't to, bring in a lot of these self-haulers. We, are using the minimum threshold that's articulated in the statute. So we'll get to that in just a few moments here. So please bear with us. All right. Last thing, the third subpoint basically talks about how the department is going to handle proprietary and business confidential data. Essentially, there are protections in our system to, especially when jurisdictions request information from certain entities that in the format that's delivered is in a manner that's aggregated by a company. Other information may be aggregated so as not to run afoul of any proprietary or confidential information collection. think that's about it. Oh, let's go to this gentleman here.
So it sounds to me like what you're doing then is a company will give you a gross tonnage on, let's say, copper. They're not necessarily going to tell you where they get it from. But what you're looking for is what is the actual amount that's coming out of that and going elsewhere. You don't particularly care who it came from, whatever. It's just coming from that company. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Quite
Okay.
so. That was the intent of the, of the regulations. So appreciate you highlighting that for us. I don't want to belabor the point on this one, but essentially this is what we're in. It's a little small print. We are required to undertake these regulations development. This was something that was instructed. The legislature instructed us to do. So we were very, I think, trying to be forthcoming and work with stakeholders as much as we can, recognizing that, look, we get it. There are other reporting requirements, that businesses have to pay attention to, and there are different reporting schedules and things like that. So, we were trying to be extremely reasonable in terms of, these new information. We don't think that businesses are going to need to go out and collect new data. For the most part, I would say 99.9% of cases, the information that we are requiring to be provided to the department is already, for the most part, something that businesses already collect or have a handle on. How many tons or cubic yards of a certain material leave the facility for sale. You would think that would be kept track of by the business. So, we're trying to be very flexible and accommodating, building in features that, try to minimize and reduce the burden on the regulated community. So also the sub point 1 and 2 lays out that we have to follow certain procedures and give opportunities to comply in terms of the compliance and enforcement process, and we're required to consider several factors in when it does come to time to actually penalize an entity for non-reporting or misreporting. So, I just want to emphasize that this is something that we're required to do. It's not, we're not going on an adventure to collect these data that we'll never use. Essentially, this is we're trying to be very narrow in scope and but not overly burden facilities we recognize already have reporting requirements. So I don't want to dwell on that too much. But there are, proprietary data protections, and this was the least burdensome alternative to implementing and collecting these data. So, just to kind of give a landscape about kind of wrapping up 901, only permitted solid waste facilities and haulers exporting waste currently report to us. They send their information to counties and regional agencies, the total tons sent for disposal by jurisdiction of origin, a few other data points, but that's largely it. So AB 901 will widen that scope. The reporting requirements, it'll allow reporting on the flow of recyclable and compostable materials by material type, by recyclers and composters, as well as exporters, transporters, brokers, and the like. AB 901 provides for enforcement by the Department for late reporting and misreporting. And expanding reporting requirements will allow the state to perform much more detailed analyses of both waste and recycling flows, enabling better evidence-based policymaking by the department. This slide provides a visual representation of the rulemaking process. As you can see, it's been a long road, so we'll take a peek at each step in the next few slides. So in 2016 and 17, the department conducted informal rulemaking, hosting 9 public workshops, releasing 4 drafts of regulatory text, and engaging with stakeholders extensively throughout. In 2018, the formal process was conducted, wherein there was a formal 45-day comment period, a public hearing, 3 15-day comment periods, and altogether over 1,000 distinct comments and questions. When staff determined no further changes were needed, the department formally approved the regulations package in late December and sent it to the Office of Administrative Law for their review and ultimately publication in the California Code of Regulations. They entered into immediate effect on March 5th and can be found on Westlaw's online California Code of Regulations under Title 14, Sections 18815.1 to 18815.13. So circling back, here's the old system and our new system, which facilitates direct reporting. So we'll be receiving reports directly from the following reporting entities under the proposed regulations: haulers, if hauling material out of state or to direct land application; transfer processing facilities and operations; disposal facilities; recycling and composting facilities and operations; and brokers and transporters who determine the destination of material they handle. AB 901 expands the scope to include facilities that have traditionally not reported to the department, as I alluded to, such as recycling and composting facilities, in-vessel digestion facilities and operations, wastewater treatment plants, brokers and transporters. So all the labeled entities in the diagram shown here will report directly to CalRecycle quarterly, should they have a reporting obligation. They'll still talk to one another, and in many cases, for instance, haulers will have to provide information to transfer processors, and transfer processors are still going to have to provide information to disposal facilities, and so on. So in reality, there's still interaction between these various nodes here. So to summarize, in EDRS, entities report via counties and information changes hands several times, getting aggregated before being passed along to CalRecycle. And EDRS covers disposal and disposal-related activities only, such as ADC, AIC, and other beneficial reuse. However, in RDRS, entities will report directly to CalRecycle. It includes disposal-related activities, just like DRS, but also adds these recycling and composting activities. And one thing I'll highlight that isn't up here on the slide is the introduction of source sector for solid waste. Entities will need to begin keeping track of the source sectors from which they receive the material in terms of percent residential, commercial, self-haul. It also provides additional granularity in terms of defining certain streams of material and how each of those streams should be reported.
And those things that Stephen just mentioned relate to the disposal facility side, not the recycler composter side.
Yeah, thank you, John, just for solid waste. Appreciate that's an important clarification. So the department believes that the new reporting system will be a vast improvement. Direct reporting to the department, as stated earlier, will streamline the reporting process. This will allow for data to be made available to jurisdictions and the public much more quickly. Reporting entities and jurisdictions will be able to access a revamped suite of reports that provide pertinent and timely information about the types and quantities of material handled from quarter to quarter and from year to year. Additionally, want to stress the protections offered for proprietary data that is entered into the system. It will remain confidential and only accessible by your reporting entity. Okay, so in terms of the direct reporting, this unified data system architecture, for instance, will allow disposal facilities to view what transfer processors reported sending them. They can accept or modify the incoming tonnages. And this will lead to better, more granular reporting about the origins of the waste, even when the waste flows through several facilities prior to being disposed. Moreover, with the department serving as a central repository of data, this will facilitate better information collection and processing. More detailed information will aid jurisdictions so that they can correct or follow up on any potential issues soon after they arise. New reports for reporting entities will be available, as I mentioned, about the types and quantities of material handled from quarter to quarter and year to year. So they can gain additional insight and verify that their data is accurate. Okay, so I'm going to preview this for now, but for RDRS registration purposes, here's sort of our architecture. At the top, we have the organization or site where the business is physically located. So that's going to be sort of the largest zooming out in terms of the hierarchy in our data system. So reporting entities will occupy space within sites. Reporting entities are like your landfill or your transfer station, and there can be several per site. That's why we say it is always within an organization or site. There can be multiple reporting entities within that. And then lastly, we have this reporting entity sub-activity or dependent activity. This is always a recycling or composting facility or operation and can be any other reporting entity type. It can report as a dependent of one reporting entity with the site, and this eases the reporting burden while still allowing for the department to collect required information. So here we have an example site, John's Resource Recovery Complex. It's a complex site with two reporting entities, a landfill and a transfer processing facility, John's MRF transfer station. And as you can see, John's MRF transfer station, which is a permitted transfer processor, is a lead reporting activity for a dependent sub-activity called John's Recycling, which is a recycling center. It has to register this John's Recycling, but it has chosen to report as part of a transfer processor. So it could report as a dependent of the landfill if management so desired, in which case the box would be on the left here. So yeah, they could report as a sub of either the transfer station or the landfill, being as a recycling activity. So just a sort of a way to roll up some of these activities that may be taking place on your site, and so you don't have to necessarily account for the flow of every single thing between activities that you do on your site. We want to allow for additional flexibility on that. Just to sort of wrap up with the background, I've alluded to this several times, but one of the most important dates is coming right up, which is the registration period, April 1 to April 30, 2019, as well as I want to flag July 1. That's when the entities with reporting obligations need to start collecting required information to be submitted to CalRecycle as part of their quarterly reports. So RDRS opens for haulers on October 1st, 2019, due October 31st. It goes live for transfer processors, recycler composters, and broker transporters on November 1st. Due November 30th, which I'm told is a Saturday, so it would be the next business day that happens, the next weekday. As for disposal facilities, as anyone can guess, December 1st. So that's one date to keep in mind, due December 31st. And that's when the system will actually go live for each of those entities in terms of the reporting. Okay, just one more thing on this here. October 15th, 2019 is when the final DRS report is due. So that I just wanted to sort of put that in a different color a little bit. It's hard to see, but that's not related to RDRS. That's going to be the last formal DRS due date for counties and regional agencies to submit the Q2 disposal data, at which point the entire DRS article will be phased out and will completely have transitioned into the new reporting system, RDRS. Okay, so some takeaways from this section. DRS is going away as of October 15th, as I just mentioned. RDRS represents an improvement over the current DRS, and registration is to occur very soon. That's why we're all here, and we're trying to make every effort possible to get folks up to speed so we can be very successful in this rollout year of RDRS. So at this point in the presentation, just to recap the agenda, we're right on schedule. So I just want to maybe take a few questions. Maybe we'll take one from the room and then go to online. Anybody have anything at this point? Yes, ma'am. And if you could maybe state your name and affiliation.
Yes, I'm Jenna Abbott with Protect CRV. You may be addressing this in the next section, and if you are, you can just shut me down. Some of our members are small independent recycling centers, perhaps in convenience zones, and I'm wondering how or whether they will be required to follow these regulations.
That's a great question, and we will start to cover that in the next section, but we've outlined some de minimis thresholds under which reporting is neither registration nor reporting would be required for recycling facilities that handle, plastic, glass, those kind of commodities. It's 100 tons per quarter. So I'm thinking a convenience zone recycling center will probably not get there.
May or may not,
yeah.
But it's good to know that there is a threshold. Thank you.
Correct. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more. Let's go to online. This is Pete Stackless, everybody, Senior Environmental Scientist, CalRecycle.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. We have a few questions. I'll start with the first one. It's from Julio M. He's a senior associate engineer. The question is, all anaerobically digested sludge from our 2 POTW plants, and that's wastewater treatment, right? Sorry, I'm not totally familiar with acronyms, are sent to a third-party composting facility located in the state of California, and this composting facility markets them to wholesalers. Do these POTW facilities need to register for RDRS?
Good question, Julio. My suspicion is that if they met or exceeded the de minimis threshold for that material type, and which is 100 tons in terms of material sent to composting, that would trigger reporting, and it depends upon whether or not the transporter determines the destination of the material. But in any case, the wastewater treatment plant would either report that they sent it to the transporter in the event that the transporter determined the destination. And if they determine the destination, like they were the ones who, adamantly said it has to go to the composting facility, they would report that they sent it to the composting facility.
Okay, next question. This is from Christina Hansen, senior planner for the County of Placer. It was just stated that the regulations don't govern counties' process to request info from facilities. Also, that data will be available online to access. However, currently, counties receive data in sufficient time to contact facilities regarding any anomalies or questionable data. So corrections, example, errors in assigned origin, can be made before the DRS reports are set in stone. How will such a process have to happen under the new system? Once the data is available online, will there be opportunity for corrections to be made?
Yeah, maybe John wants to add to this, but I would say, there's a couple of things going on with regards to that question. Number one being the sort of extent to which counties should be involved in that sort of, getting into the granularity of data and that sort of thing. My understanding was that the only responsibility for counties was to sort of be aggregating it, not really second guessing it or playing investigator. So I just would wonder about sort of the details of the goings on about that. And second, I would just say that this system, CalRecycle is gonna aggregate all the data. We're gonna have the first look at it, and then once we are fairly satisfied, we're going to release it right after the quarter, so that not just your jurisdiction, but I think the surrounding area. You'll have access to, I think, some more data that you don't have currently.
Yeah, so there'll be ample opportunity to look at and review that data for jurisdictions and counties, and there'll be a process within the application, RDRS itself, to let people flag things. And in the RDRS system, it is a live system in that it will continue to evolve. If people have something that they report that's wrong, they can go in and fix it, and it will be updated. So it's not like it's a static system where once a number is put in and it was wrong, that it will be that way forever. So people will have the opportunity to correct.
Okay, bear with me because there's some technical difficulties, but I'll try to get the next two questions in. That's all we have left. This is from Santos Marquez. Do wastewater treatment plants, POTWs, fall under 41821.5B of the regulations?
So Santos, yes, they would, to the extent that they are selling, transferring, or disposing of reportable materials. Well, not disposing, that would be the subsection A, but selling or transferring to a reporting entity or to an end user, for instance, biosolids, yes, you would fall under B.
Okay, and the last question is from Janet Gardner. Reclaimable 41821.5B, reclaimable food from food facility to food distribution point. Do we need to enter data in the system? It's kind of...
Well, food distribution sounds to me like reuse. Reuse is an excluded material handling activity. So if the material were being self-hauled to a, for instance, edible food recovery organization, my suspicion is that that would not be a reportable flow.
That was all the questions so far through email.
Great. Anyone else in the room? Yes, Mr. Shivo.
John, you brought up people, it's a live system and people could go in and change, their numbers. What's the more detailed process regarding that? Because if somebody has an allocation issue, there, it's the whole, rob Peter or pay Paul in a sense. One jurisdiction's going to get less, another more if you reallocate. How do you reconcile that?
Well, within the system, if a landfill reports that 100 tons went to jurisdiction A and 50 tons went to jurisdiction B, and then one of the jurisdiction comes and says, you guys reported wrong for us, you flipped them. They notify either us or just work with that landfill, and the landfill could go back in and make that correction in which they'd switch those numbers. So You may have one number go up and one number go down.
Okay, so the landfill would be responsible then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or if they realize on their own, gee, you know, we reconciled the books and we just realized that we did this wrong, they could go back in and correct that on their own as well.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and move into the next section here. So that was kind of the boring history of all the regulations development, but now we're going to sort of get into the meat and potatoes, as it were. We're going to talk about, you know, the actual regulations themselves. What are my requirements for my facility? So this is probably going to be pertinent to you, especially if you don't, you know, if you're a little bit confused at this point, you know, what are my obligations? I understand there's a reporting system. I understand there's reporting involved, but how do I fit in? Well, this should help you maybe get from an abstract, you know, take it to the practical a little bit more. We're going to talk about sort of who's in, who's out, haulers, transfer processors, disposal facilities, recyclers, composters, brokers, transporters. Those are generally speaking the categories under, you know, of reporting entities types in this system. So finding sort of where does my facility fit into that picture, and then we'll preview I'll call attention to anyway this tool that we're developing called Do I Need to Register? And that's going to be on the new RDRS webpage, which I'm pleased to report just went live earlier today. So we'll provide the links and all that stuff, and it's a little bit later in the slide presentation. All right, let's just jump right in, shall we? So, you know, the registration process is generally, you know, to facilitate the reporting, which, you know, of the reporting and from the reporting entities. So this is, you know, we require everyone who has a reporting obligation to go in, register, meaning make a profile, get your facility or operation or business into the system, so that when reporting comes along, you know, another facility can report that they sent you material and so on. So this is also done to help the department understand, you know, our universe of solid waste and recycling, you know, the players in the game, key players. So questions you should be asking yourself, you know, does this apply to me? You know, what's the deal? What's going on? Do I handle reportable material? Well, what do you mean by reportable materials? Solid waste, carpet, CDI, meaning construction, demolition, inert debris. Furniture, glass, metal, organics, paper, plastic, textiles, white and brown goods. If you handle these materials or in any significant quantity, so that's the next question, do I handle more than the de minimis amount in any given 3-month period? So not necessarily from quarter to quarter, but, you know, in any 3-month period would I handle this quantity of material. And it's anywhere from 6,500 pounds in the case of food waste all the way up to 2,500 tons. So we'll talk about de minimis thresholds in just a moment, but that's something to keep in mind too, is it's not just 1 ton of the material triggers reporting. You know, there are certain thresholds in there for us to keep things reasonable for folks. Do I create intermediate products? Well, what do you mean by intermediate products? Plastic flake, compost, plastic pellets, common recyclable commodity materials, like that. If that sounds like something you might create as a business, you might need to pay attention to these here regulations. Do I send intermediate products to end users or other reporting entities? So in terms of the flow of materials, where am I sending things? You know, who are my customers? Those are important considerations that factor into registration. Do I haul a significant amount of material out of state or to land application? If so, you might be a hauler. in terms of our system, and that may trigger a reporting obligation. Am I a wastewater treatment plant, also known as POTW, or publicly owned treatment works? If that's the case, as I alluded to, you may have a reporting obligation as a recycling facility, recycling and composting facility or operation. And then also what exclusions and exemptions may apply, because there are certain caveats here, and you can read about that in the regulations, but I'm going to cover that in some detail. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to sort of highlight or touch on each reporting entity type as individually, and then we'll sort of bring it all back together. So just in terms of why people need to register, I think I talked about this a little bit, but everyone who reports needs to first register. Registration is required per the regulations, and enforcement action will be taken for non-compliance. So that's probably a reason to go ahead with it. To assist CalRecycle in managing waste and recycling. So, again, helping us define our universe of players and being a part of this system that is going to help us, understand statewide recycling and disposal flows a lot better. And that way we can manage it a lot better. So stakeholders during the rulemaking process that expressed interest in a list of entities expected and not expected to report. These regulations were amended subsequent to the first 45-day comment period. So a list of entities expected to report can be found in section 18815.3b of the regulations, and a list of entities that we think would be out of the regulations can be found in subsection 188.1 in subsection C of that section. So this slide provides a rundown of the de minimis tonnages under which reporting is not required. The general case applies to all materials with a few notable exceptions, which we'll talk about in just a second. It's 100 tons per quarter of reportable materials. If you never go over 100 tons per quarter, you don't have to register. However, if you think you may go over 100 tons, it's a good idea to register. In the event you don't go over 100 tons, you would simply indicate that your facility or operation has no reportable activities for the quarter and submit your report. That's it. Disposal facilities must report at any tonnage. They don't follow the 100-ton rule. Organics has a special caveat as well. If you're a contract hauler and you deliver more than 50 tons of organics per quarter to direct land application, you must report on this material transfer, so not 100 tons. Additionally, CDI, construction, demolition, inert debris, has a much higher threshold, but in order to qualify for that higher threshold, basically that's all you do. You exclusively handle CDI and not solid waste or any other material type. Food waste self-haulers, so getting into the gentlelady's question, your threshold is 12 cubic yards or 6,500 pounds per quarter of your own food waste. I'll take it in just a second. So who's in general, in terms of who's in, again, the general case, you can look to section 18815.3b of the regulations for more detail on this specifically. Haulers who are persons who take material from a generator and deliver it to a reporting entity, end user, or out of state. Contract haulers would only, again, report to CalRecycle when they haul 100 tons or more out of state per quarter, or when they haul more than 50 tons to direct land application, as mentioned in the prior slide. Food waste self-haulers, just same as last slide. Transfer processing facilities will adhere to the 100-ton or 2,500-ton thresholds depending on what they do. Same thing with recycling facilities, recycling and composting facilities and operations. It would be the 100-ton, 2,500-ton thresholds. Brokers and transporters generally would adhere to the 100-ton tonnage threshold. Did you want to jump in?
On the prior slide, it said 12 cubic yards per week, but that's actually 1 cubic yard per week or 12 cubic yards per quarter.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Thank you. Let's go ahead and take your questions, sir. Go ahead, please.
With regards to wastewater treatment plants, you're getting a lot of questions today about that. And biosolids for recycling and composting, is that based on actual weight, which is usually a wet weight? It's usually 20% solids to 50% solids, or is that a dry weight?
So it's basically however much it weighed at the time that it left. So yeah, whatever state it was in when it departed. So if it was wet, then yeah, it would be that. Thank you. Good point for clarification. Everybody good on this one? Oh, let's go to this gentlelady here. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a question on your transfer processing facility. You say 100 tons or 2,500 tons of CDI. Does that mean 100 tons of any one of those other items mentioned?
Correct. So it would be, let's see here.
Solid waste, carpet, furniture, glass, metal, organics, anything?
Correct. All of that in combination would be the 100-ton threshold. It's only the 2,500 tons when it's just CDI.
Okay.
Good question. So in terms of who's out, we can pretty categorically say generators are out. These are people whose activities involve the initial creation of material. Those who initially generate reportable materials. So, like the person who puts, food waste, for instance, into this green bin, they would be considered a generator. And pretty much under no circumstances would they need to tango or interact in any way with the reporting system. It's really only the people who move, large quantities of material is who we're interested in capturing here. So you can be a generator and something else, though. So you can't just lean on, look, hey, I dropped this piece of paper that makes me a generator and I'm out. No, that's not the way it works. You have, if that, it's only for if that's all you do. If you do other things like I make compost, you're still in. End users are also similarly out. So a person who takes plastic pellets or flake and blow molds it into a bottle, PET bottle, that would be considered an end user, manufacturing and packaging, and they would not have a reporting obligation in RDRS. Same thing for end users as generators. A lot of people want to call themselves end users when when they may do other activities that place them in the realm of recycler or transfer processor or that another entity. So if all you do is use intermediate products to make things or apply intermediate products to surfaces, for instance, inert debris fill or land application or construction, you're out. You're probably out, but if you're doing something like crushing rock and then selling it in addition to applying it yourself, you're probably in. So there are a number of categories of end users, and I don't really want to take all that time to get into each one of these. So I'll just say, if you're curious, please reference that regulatory code section, and it'll tell you all about what it means to be A through F in terms of end user. You can be if all you do is handle these excluded materials, you will not have a reporting obligation in RDRS. So if you handle, household hazardous waste, universal waste, electronic waste, medications, sharps, used oil, paint, mattresses, business-to-business post-industrial materials, that those have certain qualifications that you can read about in section 188.15.2A8 of the regulations. Non-hazardous secondary materials excluded from solid waste, and materials that are reused as defined in the definition section. So if this is all you do, you're out. You don't have to report on any of these. We're not intending for you to do so. However, if you handle these in combination with other reportable materials, you still have to report the reportable materials. You don't have to report these materials under any circumstances. Okay. All right. I thought so. Thank you. All right. So raise your hand if you think you might be a hauler. Nobody. Okay. A couple folks. So this section might be of interest to you here. So this might be a little bit of recap, because we sort of covered some of these base cases already, but I'm going to reiterate it one more time for training purposes. Contract haulers who deliver 100 tons or more of reportable material out of state per quarter would have a reporting obligation under RDRS. Contract haulers who haul 50 tons or more of reportable materials to direct land application in or out of state, that would also trigger a reporting an obligation to register and report under RDRS. Food waste self-haulers who haul 12 cubic yards per quarter. 13 cubic yards of their own food waste to a facility or operation not owned by them per quarter would have a reporting obligation under RDRS.
And Stephen just went over why you might have to register and be part of RDRS. But contract haulers who take material to facilities in state will still be asked, what jurisdiction does this material come from? And the regulations still cover that requirement, where you have to tell the landfill or the transfer station, yeah, this is from Garden Grove, or this is from Whittier. You wouldn't have to register it that way. You cover that in the next slide. I'm sorry, I'm jumping the gun a little bit. But you'd still be part of the system overall, but you wouldn't have to register.
Great. Thanks for emphasizing that, John. Can you just hang on 1 second? I'll just wrap up with the haulers, and then we'll circle back. So who's out, as John mentioned, most of these most of the hauling sort of activities we think are going to be out because it involves, picking up material from a generator and delivering it to an in-state reporting entity like a transfer station or a landfill. That's what most contract hauling we think involves. And just to be perfectly crystal clear, those are not reportable flows in RDRS. You'll still need to provide, whatever required information you need to the receiving facility, and please cooperate with them if that's the case for you. But you wouldn't have any obligation to report that to us in this system. So an entity that doesn't do any of those activities in the last slide and exclusively does these activities in this slide are exempt. So as I said, a contract hauler who takes material from a generator, hauls it directly to an end user. That's not a reportable flow for us, except for land application, because that's technically an end use. So we do want and require that to be reported on. And then, as I just mentioned, an in-state taking material to an in-state reporting entity, again, not covered in these regulations. All right. So that's pretty straightforward. Anyone representing transfer processor think they might be one? All right. See a couple more hands here. That's good. Oh, sorry. Let's get to this gentleman's question here.
I think you answered my question. This might apply to many people here. So I'm an end user, right? So I don't have to report. But what if I start hauling my own material from the recyclers? But I think you said we don't have to.
That's correct. Yeah, it doesn't
right?
matter if you pick it up or they drive it to you. You know.
Even my drive, or even if I subcontract someone else, they don't need to report either, right?
If I'm understanding your question, probably not. Not you, but you know, if it were the case that that they're the ones who you interact with, like you know, they were the ones who facilitated the sale. They made that sort of happen. They brokered it. There may be something there, but we can sort of talk through that as well. But I would say, generally speaking, no. All right, transfer processor. So this is a facility or operation with a notification, registration, standardized, or full solid waste facilities permit, and either transfers or processes 100 tons of those materials, plastic, glass, carpet, furniture, textiles, white and brown goods, etc., organics, or transfers or processes exclusively 2,500 tons of CDI, and this is, again, per quarter. So those are the two sort of requirements and under which you would be required to register and report as a transfer processor. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a quick question. So if you have a transfer station that ships out your trash to, say, Nevada, you're reporting that as the transfer station, but if a subcontractor hauls that for you, are they reporting as a hauler as well?
They may have a reporting obligation as a transporter if they determined the destination of the material. So it sounds like you already, you know, it's
if the transfer station determines where they are shipping it to, if the transfer station determines the landfill they are sending it to,
the transfer station reports that flow.
Okay, so the sub hauler does not report in that case.
Correct. It does not report in that case.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and to clarify, the transfer station in that situation would report sending that material to the end destination, not to the transporter organization.
If we're a wastewater treatment facility and we're accepting food waste from an organic diversion process from a landfill to put into our anaerobic digester directly, are we considered a processor?
So it's it sounds like you are receiving organic material and conducting like in-vessel digestion on it or anaerobic digestion. That sounds to me like that's a recycling activity as defined in the regulations. So the outputs of that process would, if they left the site in, you know, met or exceed the de minimis threshold, that would be a reportable flow. It sounds like to me what we're interested in. But in terms of like the input, the person inputting the material into the wastewater treatment plant, yeah, I suppose they would have a reporting obligation as well. Yeah.
But I do want to circle back on just recycling and recyclers and composters in general are only reporting on outflows. So you don't have to worry about reporting an inflow regardless. So, but if you have outflows of intermediate products because of that material that flowed in, then you might have a reporting obligation depending on tonnage.
Yeah, so wastewater treatment plant, they would never tell us about the material that they receive. It's only the material that leaves the site again. And that's the case for all recycling and composting facilities and operations. Yeah.
Jenna Abbott, Protect CRV. So if I'm understanding correctly, a small independent recycler would not report what they took in. They would only report what they were transferring to, say, a processor.
Yes, 100% correct, ma'am.
And then the follow-on to that would be what if the entity had multiple locations? Are they required to report as each single location, or would the reporting requirement be triggered by the aggregate of all of their locations?
It's just the single site on its own. It wouldn't be the aggregate.
So if an independent recycler had, say, 200 sites in a convenience zone, any one of those sites would have to hit the 100 tons per quarter. It wouldn't be the aggregate of all of those 200 sites.
Not unless they were physically located on the same site.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if there wouldn't be 200 recyclers in a convenience zone, but
Right.
if there were, I mean, I think, yeah. So if the convenience zone is like one parcel, then they would anyone on that parcel would need to report. But
let's say there was one recycling entity that owned 200 convenience zone sites, or had the rights to 200 convenience zone sites. The obligation to report would be triggered if any one of those individual sites triggered.
Oh, no, it's not like you would report for one, you report for all. It's only the facilities that meet or exceed that tonnage threshold would need to be. So let's say you have 200 of these facilities, and let's say maybe only 2 of them actually went over 100 tons. It would just be those 2 that would need to be reported on. And those would be done separately in separate reports. But you would you could probably still do all of those zones or all of those facilities with one account, which we'll talk about when we get to the data system side.
Got it.
Yeah, let's take one more question or 2 more questions, and then we'll move on.
So if you have material going to multiple sites that you then transfer to a single site and ship out as a single shipment, that would just be reported on the final shipment. You would not report the transfers from the other locations?
Well, are the other locations on the same physical site, or?
No, it would be throughout the state. And then also if you have shipments that you bring in from out of state that, are then combined in with your, sale of material, how is that reported or not reported?
Sure. So this is probably a good point to talk about it. Transfer processors, in contrast to recycling and composting facilities, that's the one or 2 of the reporting entity types where we do require information about the input of material on. So for each inflow into the site of solid waste, coming from each particular area, we would need to know information related to that coming on the inbound as well as leaving the site. But we can talk, maybe during the break or something about your specific situation. But yeah, anytime a transfer processor receives material from another reporting entity or, as well as direct haul, that needs to be entered into RDRS.
This is probably obvious, but I got to ask it to clear it up. So I bring in reportable recyclables, and I'm storing them in my yard because I don't want to pass them on. There's no sale for them or whatever. I don't actually report those for purposes of this until I actually get rid of them, move them off site.
Correct. Yeah. Stockpiling, you don't need to tell us about just when it leaves.
It's only when I move it out.
Yes. And that's true for pretty much any facility we're talking about this afternoon.
But because we're talking about transfer processors, I'm just going to say they do have reporting requirements for inflows as well. For recyclers and composters, input, stockpiling, none of that matters. It's outflows only.
All right. Anyone else, please just hold your questions until the Q&A period, which I promise is coming up soon. I'm just going to try to breeze through some of these slides. These are in the regulations, but I wanted to take a moment to just give you sort of a list of, and this is the who's in, who's out list. So these are the types of entities that we would think would need to register and report as a transfer processor. So I'm not going to bother reading all of these right here, but you can take if any of these permit tiers or facility types apply to you. Chances are good that if you meet or exceed the tonnage threshold, you would need to report. So here's a few more, and the regulatory code section where these this list can be found. So chances are good that, especially for these facilities, that you would need to register and report. Okay, some exemptions, because I promised I would talk about those. Exemptions based on status or permit. For instance, emergency transfer processing operations are not included within the scope of the regulations. Same for emergency CDI processing operations and maintenance district yards, which are essential. We think of more so as kind of initial generators, because they just kind of sweep public thoroughfares and kind of aggregate, street sweepings material, and it's later sent to usually a commercial facility to be processed or for disposal. So we're not really interested in capturing maintenance district yards and regulating them as transfer processor. All right, please raise your hand if you have a disposal facility. All right, well, this might be important for you. Permitted disposal facility that disposes or beneficially reuses any tonnage with the following permits: registration, standardized, full. So solid waste landfills, engineer municipal solid waste conversion facilities, transformation, inert debris type A, type B disposal facilities, industrial waste co-disposal facilities, waste tire disposal facilities. All of those are going to be needing to be registered and reported in RDRS. With the exception of EMSW conversion facilities that exclusively convert tires, source-separated tires or biomass, and inert debris engineer fill operation or IDEFO, as well as biomass conversion facilities. Those are specifically out, and you can look at that regulatory code section for more information. All right, just want to wrap up here. A couple more reporting entity types. Recycling and composting facilities and operations. We've kind of beaten around the bush, I feel like, throughout this presentation, but just to sort of reiterate, a recycling facility or operation is one that recycles material, and that's not very helpful. So what does recycling mean? It has the same meaning as Section 40180 of the Public Resource Code. That's not very helpful either, but you can still look that up if you want to. More specifically, it's a person who engages in the activities that we say are recycling activities in our regulations. So some clues: you may be a recycler include if you sort, clean, bale. Well, you do any of these things with regard to material. That's a clue that you might have a reporting obligation as a recycler. Some more questions to ask yourself. Do I do any of those actions, those verbs? Do I create intermediate products, meaning things that substitute or replace or virgin material like plastic pellets, flake, paper pulp, bales of metal or cans, glass cullet, things that replace fuel like tires sent to EMSW conversion, make wood chips or compost. That's a good clue you be in as a recycler composter. You create homogeneous mixtures for direct land application like aggregates, road base, or biosolids. And you would, generally speaking, follow the 100-ton de minimis reporting threshold, or the 2,500 ton threshold if it's exclusive CDI recycling. So here are some types of facilities that we think would have a reporting obligation. Again, MRFs, material recovery facilities that don't require a solid waste facilities permit, also known colloquially as recycling center or clean MRF. Wastewater treatment plant would be in as a recycler, composter. Paper pulpers, textile fiber reclaimers, plastic reclaimers, metal, glass, and BCRP recyclers and processors to the extent that they, again, meet or exceed the tonnage threshold. Here's some more carpet collectors and recyclers, C&D, CDI recyclers, chipping and grinding operations, and various other permit tiers, automobile shredders, and then on the more sort of composter side, permitted composting facilities and research operations, in-vessel digestion or anaerobic digestion, and wastewater treatment plant. Kind of stagger, the kind of straddles the line between recycler and composter, but squarely in our regulations as that reporting entity type, recycler/composter. All right, so who's out? If you're excluded by the composting and in-vessel digestion regulations, you're similarly excluded from our regulations. So if that applies to you, you would not need to report in RDRS. A recycler who only recycles what they generate. A recycler who exclusively uses material for their own end use and does not sell or transfer reportable material. A wastewater treatment plant that only sends material to other wastewater treatment plants or does not transfer organic feedstock/intermediate products off-site. And then entities that are primarily engaged in resale for reuse. So this might apply to you if you're, for instance, like an auto dismantler or a thrift store or building supplier, reclaimer or reuser. You would, essentially take a look at if the revenues or the tonnages from resale for reuse exceeded the revenues or tonnages from the revenue for recycling, resale for recycling. So you would do that sort of calculation and then make a determination about whether or not this exemption would apply to you if you're a big time reuser of material as opposed to recycler. And then an entity who exclusively recycles non-reportable materials like HHW. All right, we're a little bit over time, so let me just cover this real quick and then we'll take quick break. I'm just going to ask you to hold until the next section. Sorry about that. Brokers and transporters who sell or transfer 100 tons or more of material for which they controlled and determined the destination. So, I think this has come up several times. It's really only when the broker or transporter, determines the destination of the material. Like they're the ones essentially who say where it's going to go, as opposed to the person that they get the material from. So, the flip side of that is that if the broker and transporter does not determine, they just drive it from one place to another, they don't have the reporting obligation. It's the facility who instructed them to drive it to the particular place that would report on that transfer. Best practices, I would suggest if you're in doubt or kind of on the fence about whether your facility or operation should need to register, I would say just do it, because you can always delete it later before the reporting opens. Send us an email, explaining your confusion, and we'll try to help you out by, working with you on the determination if it's sort of on the fence. there's an opportunity to aggregate multiple activities on the same site. We're going to talk about that in a subsequent agenda item. But I want to make sure that we are keeping to the schedule. So, why don't we just take a quick 10-minute break here? We'll pick it up from where it is at this point in the slide presentation. We'll just kind of go from there. Thank you.
So try to be back by 3:15.
Okay, folks, we're going to try to get started in about 1 minute. All right, folks, we're going to bring it back just kind of to continue on the last few slides here. Actually, there's just one slide until the end of this section, and then we're running a little bit behind, so try to make up for that, and I apologize. All right, so when we left off, we were just about to talk about the do I need to register tool. I think I had sort of highlighted this a little bit earlier in the day, but this is a tool that's currently under development and will be released in the coming days. And there's also this brand new RDRS web page that has just gone live today. The link is right there in the slides, so you can navigate on over there and check it out. The link to the tool is currently not or there should be a link on that site, and that's not currently active yet, but that's where it will live, and it will ask you some similar questions to what we basically went over in the last 45 minutes or an hour or so, talking about sort of the kinds of materials you handle, in what quantity, what kind of permit status you are, how you're regulated, where you send material. And based on your responses, it will output a preliminary, non-binding determination about what all is going on your site. It'll based on your responses, it'll say something like you have a landfill or a disposal facility, and you have a transfer processor, and you have a recycling facility, and then it'll sort of tell you how you can how to register that, or we can give you some kind of high level tips about how you can aggregate that. We're also going to be talking about that a little bit later on in today's presentation. So that's it for this section. As you can see, we're a little bit behind schedule, but that's all right. At this point, we'll take some online questions and then pop back to the room and see if there's anything else.
Okay, we have a few questions, about 5. So I'll start. First one is from Duke Bowie. He's a DRS coordinator for Los Angeles County Public Works. He asks, will the portal login for jurisdictions hold different or more detailed data than the data that is available for the public? And will the public need to have a login to view data?
Great. So there will not be a difference on the disposal side for what jurisdictions can view versus the public for the disposal side. For the recycling side, there is as stated in the statute, the ability for jurisdictions to request data aggregated by company, but that's sort of a different story.
I can help answer this too, since I'm working on it. The same data will be available to the public as it is for jurisdictions and counties. We just anticipate maybe the login for counties and jurisdictions, you'll have more like filter options, and maybe you can like send emails to us quicker and things like that, because we're not trying to hide any kind of data behind just for jurisdictions. We anticipate having the same type of reports for both the public and for jurisdictions and counties. Okay, and then the next question, let me get it here.
And the public won't need to do a web pass or anything to log in. It'll just be part of a report on the website, as it could be for the jurisdictions as well. Although I'm sure there'll be a link through the logic system that jurisdictions are used to working in.
Another question is from Sherman Allison, Waste Management Coordinator, Public Works Department for Torrance. Will you go through how jurisdictions access the reports / tonnage reports and information online and when?
Yes, we will, Sherman. That's going to take place in January 2020 when we have, some data populated in RDRS, excuse me. So that way, we can interface with what's going on in there. And, it's really not until the next year and then some that we are, expecting jurisdictions to get involved with the new system anyway. So please stay tuned for that.
And then we had a follow-up reply from Chris Hansen for his earlier question. He's from the County of Placer. He was saying, thanks for answering my question. I want to clarify that I wasn't referring to the county's role as data aggregator, assessing accuracy of all received data, but as a jurisdiction that wants to receive and track DRS data assigned to their jurisdiction and have an opportunity to investigate anomalies. Thanks again.
Yeah, so Ms. Hanson, in regards to your question, as is the case with DRS, nothing in the regulations precludes the ability of the local government to do what they need to do to get their data in a form that's appropriate for their needs. So, to the extent that there's other local ordinances or franchise agreements that govern, the receipt of these data by the county, haulers and other facilities and operations within the county would still need to adhere to those, so that's sort of the landscape in terms of the data access. And, if you need more than, the baseline of, I would suggest, maybe going that route.
And it will be easy for jurisdictions to go in and see what disposal is being attributed to them by which facilities. And in fact, it'll be enhanced since it will have transfer station data there as well. And then they can interact with us or directly with the facilities to get that data corrected if they find problems.
Yeah, just to add on, so in the electronic annual reporting right now, you can only view landfill disposal that's attributed to your jurisdiction, but we anticipate there being the ability for you to view transfer station allocation data specific to your jurisdiction. So that does represent an improvement over sort of what's being reported now, at least in the electronic annual report. I get that as a disposal report coordinator, you receive, reports from transfer stations as well, but this will all be aggregated. It'll all be in RDRS under the same system.
Jeff Donlevy with Ming's Recycling. Let's say you have a corporation that has a couple hundred retail stores that do not generate the 100 tons per quarter, but their distribution center is backhauling bales of cardboard, film, scrap metal, food waste, other material generated from those stores. And then that distribution center is handling 1,000 to 2,000 tons a month of material, and they're selling it to multiple brokers. Who's responsible for reporting?
Yeah, that's a good question. That warehouse isn't, it doesn't have any solid waste permit or anything like that. No, right? Okay. Yeah, distribution center. I would say that, well, and they're not really determining who the material ends up being sold to, right? That's done through the broker. Right. So I think what my response would be is you would report the total tons of each material type, and you would report the destination as the broker. The distribution center would report that. The broker would also have a reporting obligation when they sold or transferred that material that they received from you. They would report whomever it is that they sent it to, whether it's an end user to end users or to other reporting entities. So, for instance, if the broker sent your cardboard to, like another facility for processing, they would report it sending to that particular facility. If they sent it for export overseas, they would indicate basically the tons, the material type, and the country that it was sent to, but not any particular customer, would be sort of my understanding. Does that help? Okay. Let's go to this gentleman here, please.
Hi, my name's Monty Yamamoto. I'm with Silicon Valley Clean Water. In the wastewater industry, we're already regulated and required to report to the EPA under 40 CFR 503. And also we report to the regional boards of the water board. What's the reasoning for CalRecycle now to require reporting on biosolids production and transportation?
So, I'm not sure to the extent, to what extent the overlap is with the existing 503 reporting requirements. I can tell you, that's fed. They don't let us access their data. There's not an agreement or MOU in place. So for all intents and purposes, CalRecycle doesn't have access to any of that reporting. So I think my number one would be, we need the ability to collect those data as well. My number two is that, a wastewater treatment plant is handling reportable materials just like other folks are, and it wouldn't, in my mind, and this is my personal belief, be appropriate to say, well, for these entities, you have to tell us when you transfer organic material, but for these entities, that doesn't apply. So I think it's for sort of consistency's sake, and also, because biosolids are kind of a concern for the department. It's a material that we very honestly want to keep an eye on in terms of, look, there is some, not so savory practices happening with biosolids being sent to the Central Valley for land application. Certain cases, it's done so in a manner that's not consistent with the rules. So we want to be able to keep an eye on that, those sort of flows. John?
And another aspect is organics are just such a huge part of the waste stream that we need to look at people who handle organics. You were talking about the example of taking food material or other materials into a process as well. And so this was discussed a lot in the regulatory workshops, and then the wastewater treatment plants were slotted as recyclers. So that's some of the background of it. Now those regulations are in, but that's a little bit of the background for you.
Okay, we had a few more email questions. This one's about registering from Amelin Norzamini. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. If we are both a landfill and a recycling facility, do we need to register separately?
So we'll cover that in the following couple sections, but we'll talk about sort of best practices for how to do that. If you're a recycling activity, you may aggregate with, a solid waste activity like a landfill or a transfer processor for ease of reporting purposes.
Okay, and we have a question from Julio M., Senior Associate Engineer. Is the RDRS operational? Are you going to provide a link to the user manual for the RDRS system? It would be helpful to have a list of required information for registration. Thank you.
So Julio, good news, we are going to cover that. And in terms of the user manual, that's currently under active development. With regards to your question about is it up yet? No, it is not up yet, but it will be up soon, and we'll let everybody know when that's the case. we're thinking, since April 1st is the opening of registration, and entities can't do it any sooner than that, April 1st will be the launch date for the registration portion of the RDRS system. Thank you.
Okay, and finally, we have a pretty long question here.
Oh, sorry, Peter, I just want to take this gentle lady here in the back.
We just have one more question. I just want to verify that this is replacing the quarterly station notification, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And
for
the
transfer
annual,
processor.
I can't think of the full name.
Annual methods report.
Thank you.
That's correct. The annual methods report will no longer be a requirement once DRS is phased out. But for the 2018 reporting year, the annual methods report is required.
Does this also replace any additional reporting to local enforcement agencies, like your annual tonnage report? Or quarterly tonnage report? Does this replace that?
No, it would not.
Okay.
Oh, sorry about that, Pete. Go ahead.
No worries. We have a couple questions from Carlos Chavez, a program analyst. So I'll just do the first one, and then you can answer. So if a transfer station operator also owns and operates lots of small solid waste satellite sites with bins that are individually below the reporting threshold, and those bins are hauled by transfer station staff directly to a landfill for disposal and not to their own transfer station, does the transfer station operator report as a transporter to CalRecycle for the cumulative tonnage hauled when satellite site hauling surpasses the reporting threshold, and then report as a hauler to the landfill that receives that tonnage?
Good questions, Carlos. They're kind of in the weeds, but I would say that those small sites would not be reporting entities, first of all, unless they met or exceeded that tonnage threshold. Your hypothetical of if they do, it would be the transfer station that would report sending the material to the other transfer station, whichever transfer station met or exceeded that tonnage threshold. And then the person who moved that material between transfer stations would not be a hauler, they would be a transporter. But the transporter wouldn't have a reporting obligation, it sounds like in this instance, because they're not determining the destination. They're just simply moving material from a smaller transfer station to a little bit larger one. So we can chat offline about what that would look like. But generally speaking, the small volume transfer stations, if they don't meet the de minimis, there would be no reporting. It would all be aggregated whenever it came to the larger facility. Thank you.
Okay, and then his next question, the slide for haulers, exempted contract haulers that deliver materials from generators to reporting entities, unless they also conducted activities in the previous slide. For companies that have vehicles and do haul in that manner and do conduct other covered activities as recyclers or transfer stations, do you expect them to report tons hauled from generators and delivered to reporting entities?
Good question. So just to clarify, I think the person was asking, well, I haul material out of state and I also haul material in state. If I meet or exceed the out of state tonnage threshold, do I have to report on the material for in state? The answer to that is no. You would only report on the material for going out of state. In no instance would you report the material that you sent to a reporting entity.
Yeah, you don't have to report that to us. Again, when you send it to a landfill or transfer station and they say, what jurisdictions did this come from? You get to tell them that still.
Okay, and then the final question was, will jurisdictions be able to look up all registered reporters in the RDRS system?
If the question is it like a physical or drop-down list, I believe we were looking to build in that functionality to do like lookups of entities that have already registered in the system. And I think the reason for that was to identify if there were people who still needed to get into the system. So my answer is I believe so. And if not, it's a feature that we intend to add, I think, in the coming days or weeks or months.
Yeah, we hope to get that out. I think it was around June. So, and that was it for the questions from email.
Oh, great. Okay, did we have another hand? Nope. Okay. Yeah, we already took the afternoon break. So now we're going to look at creating a web pass and getting into RDRS. I'm just going to sort of lay out how that all works. Just a show of hands, how many people in the room already have a CalRecycle web pass? Oh, okay. So a little bit like, maybe a third of the people here. So in that instance, you would not have to do this. You can use your existing web pass. You'll navigate to your browser to the following URL, and you can click in there. It's going to open up a web page just like the one you see on the right-hand side of the slide. It's going to ask for just some basic information about you and ask you to create a password. Now, the email address, it is going to be verified, in terms of like, they'll send you something, so you can't just type in anything you want. That's what you're going to end up using as your login or username. So it should basically be the email that you're going to check fairly often. So you'll fill out the required information, and then check the box and click create my account. Let's see. All right. Step 3 is to actually go into your account, your email, and you'll have gotten an email from CalRecycle automated system indicating you need to verify your web pass, and you would click the link that says to verify your email address, click the link. So you'll do that, and it'll say, your web pass has been successfully created, at which point you'll log into the RDRS system itself, type the web pass, the email address that you used to create the web pass into RDRS, and click next. Oops. You'll verify that it's the password protection phrase that you typed in when you initially registered your web pass. You're going to type in the password you use when you create your web pass and click next. So, fairly straightforward. I think a lot of folks are probably used to registering for various things online, and in the year 2019, everything is, involves registration, it seems like, these days. So this should not be, terribly out of the realm of reality or that sort of thing. So really quick, I'm going to just ruin my stage presence. I'm going to head over to that computer over there, and I'm basically going to just demo that whole process for you. Hi. So, and if you're wondering why am I doing this, it's basically for the training and outreach purposes. There may be people out there who this is all brand new to them. So almost for posterity's sake, I do feel like we should take the time to do this. So please bear with me. It'll be over soon. So what you'll want to do is go to as I explained, I probably should have demoed this on the computer before I started. So we may not end up doing this. But anyway, you would want to go to that WebPass site and basically create your account. So I'm going to sort of call an audible, and instead of following in order to get to the website, just. Oh, okay. Let's give you folks a preview of the RDRS, the new RDRS website. So this will be a brand new for folks. Oops. All right, so this is our brand new recycling disposal reporting system website. You'll go to this link here, create and manage your WebPass. So you'll want to go to create account, and we'll just go ahead and input the, essentially the same thing that we did on the slide.
If you can zoom that in a little bit,
oh, sure.
People with old eyes in the back row like me would appreciate it. Thank you.
So we're going to type in the email address that we want to use. In this case, I just made one called rdrstest@gmail.com. Create a password. I think it should be 8 to 16 characters. And you can read about some of the requirements just above the box here. And the personal assurance phrase to make sure you're on the right website. So you'll go through this whole rigmarole. I know how much we all love this, right? So, it'll say account activation pending. So now I'll want to go into my Gmail account and verify that I am the person. So this is not me. But we can log into that email here. And if all goes well, yes, we have an email from CalRecycle. It's going to say to verify your email. You'll click the link below, so let's go ahead and do that. Oh, now our activation is complete, and we have a web pass, so that was pretty easy. At that point, we'll cruise on over to the actual RDRS web page. So that's actually still under, there's a 50-50 chance that this will work. I think this is currently in staging, in IT staging behind our intranet. So it may not work on here, but let's see. It did work. Okay, so we'll type in our email that we used to register. There's a personal assurance phrase that we used in the registration, so you know it's our CalRecycle website. Go ahead and enter our password. I think I did that right. And boom, there we are. We're in the system. Wasn't that easy, folks? So that's all there is to it. Pretty straightforward, and that's how you actually get into RDRS. So I'm going to go ahead and switch gears, bring it back to my presentation. Yeah, let's see. Are there any questions at this point about WebPass? And we'll just wait a couple moments for anything to come on in from the online.
We do have a few.
Oh.
And we
Oh
have
yeah,
one in the
go.
room.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to ask, is there as far as the actual reporting process, are you going to have like a file format that we will need to follow that will just upload a file to you, or what is that process?
Good question. We don't have the functionality to upload reports at the moment. It's something that we can certainly talk about as far as like revisions and things to this and enhancements to the system. But right now we're wanting everyone to go through the web interface to submit these data.
Because we're talking about summary quarterly data, we think it shouldn't be that many entries. There's certain things that can be aggregated and such too. So.
And we're also investigating the possibility of, if you do the same flows of material, each quarter, we're looking into the functionality of sort of importing, kind of like same as last quarter, but then you can modify some of the tonnages. So we're interested in collecting user feedback on how this all is going to work. And I think we're getting into a little bit about the reporting now. So we just want to focus on the registration aspect for today's presentation. But yeah, happy to follow up if you have any suggestions or enhancements.
I just have a quick question about the WebPass. How are you going to connect that WebPass to a designated facility? Because my WebPass goes to tons of different reports and different jurisdictions and other things like that. So how do you connect it so that not everyone can just report on a facility's behalf?
Great question. So the permissions for RDRS are essentially starting from the ground floor, meaning you're not going to automatically be associated with all of those other ones that you may be associated with in other databases and stuff. You'll need to go in and actually create all your facilities from scratch, and then you would be associated with them at that point in time. Also, when others create facilities and operations in RDRS, they can choose to have you be associated with them. So that would be a method so you can be connected to each of the facilities that you're, responsible for. Does that make sense? Or, well, maybe we can. I think we'll cover it a little bit more in this next section. Yeah, why don't we go to online?
Yeah, specific to WebPass, I have two questions from Sarah Trousdale, who is an environmental compliance analyst for Alameda County Industries. The first one is she would like to know how to update her WebPass account with the RDRS reporting.
Yeah, so as I mentioned to this gentlelady, you'll need to go in and actually create your, in this case, Alameda County Industries. You'll need to create that profile from scratch. That's what we're going to cover in the next section. So anything you might have been associated with in other data systems, not really, it's not going to transfer over to for RDRS purposes.
And her second question was she has a WebPass account and needs to know how to link to RDRS or link RDRS to her current account.
Right. So you'll just basically need to log in with your WebPass, and then that's it. No other steps are required. Was there anything additional? Or? Oh, okay. I think that was it from the. That was it for the online as it relates to the WebPass. So now we're going to sort of get into the navigating the registration part. So this is actually, more hands-on, more data system related stuff. So we'll talk about first, how to aggregate multiple activities on a site, because that's come up several times, and I know folks are quite interested in hearing about that. Then we'll talk about sort of the look and feel of the registration module, meaning the thing that I just showed everyone how to log into. And then we'll talk about sort of the required fields in terms of registration. What stuff do you have? What stuff do you need to have in front of you in order to register your facility in RDRS? So, without further ado, let's jump on in. Multiple activities on a site. So here's this graphic is Western Placer Waste Management Authority. This is an example of a complex site. I think this is like a concept. This isn't actually their operations right now, but in any case, I happen to know that they have landfill and a composting facility and a permitted solid waste transfer processor with a permitted solid waste facilities permit. So that's an example of a lot going on within a single site. So if you kind of look at the square boundaries of the entire thing, that would represent what we in our DRS would call the site or physical site. And then these little boxes within that, those could be reporting entities, or in depending on how you want to classify it, reporting entity sub activities or dependent activities. But we'll cover all of this so that it's clear for folks. And so remember, when in doubt, register. There's really no penalty for doing so, and it will ensure that you're in compliance with all the regulatory provisions in case there's any doubt. So here are some general things to keep in mind with regards to multiple activities. A recycler composter may either have its own RDRS number or report as a dependent activity of a transfer processor or a disposal facility. Several recycler composters may aggregate into one RDRS number or even none and just report as a sub of a transfer processor or landfill. But a transfer processor and a disposal facility may never report together or as a sub activity. So let's recap here. So organization site, that's basically the physical boundaries of your business or facility. So there could be multiple facilities or operations on a single site, in other words, multiple reporting entities within a single site or organization. For instance, you can have a landfill and a transfer processor on the same site, and there would be two RDRS numbers associated with that. And then you can have, in addition to that, as I mentioned before, sub-activities, so recycling and composting facilities and operations that report as a dependent of reporting entities. So that's essentially how we've arranged things in the system. Might be a little bit sort of high level now, but hopefully these examples will serve to make things a little bit more clear for folks. So going back to our previous example of a complex site, we had John's Resource Recovery Complex that has two reporting entities on a single site, a landfill and a transfer station MRF called John's MRF. So there's two RDRS numbers, as you can see, 1000315 and 1000316. Now there's also a, let's just call it a clean line, John's Recycling. That's a clean recycling activity that is taking place in addition to these other activities. So in this case, they've elected to report as a dependent of the transfer station. And that's totally within their purview to do. So they would aggregate their reporting with that of the transfer station. But they would still need to register. They just wouldn't have a reporting obligation independently because they're having the transfer station take the lead on reporting their outputs. So they could, as I mentioned before, the sub activity John's Recycling could also report as a dependent of the landfill as well. Or there could be two sub activities, and they could each of them could report at as a sub of the those two reporting entities, one each if they wanted to. If we had another one called John's Buyback, there could be one on one reporting entity and 4 or 10 on another. So it really runs the gamut. These are all acceptable configurations for how to register. So we have, you could separate it, with pretty much as much granularity or as little granularity as you like. So here we have an example of like John's office paper line, John's bottle sorting, John's plastic flaking, John's buyback. All of those can be different sub activities, but they can still aggregate their reporting through one or more reporting entities. Or alternatively, if they wanted to, they could report as reporting as their own reporting entity, and not as a sub activity. So, if they wanted to, they could report just like the transfer station, and be required to do an independent report for that. So, and then they could also even have a recycling facility can roll up, other recycling facilities into it. So here we have the landfill, the MRF transfer station, and a separate recycling facility that's also reporting as a lead for another dependent activity, John's Buyback. So, multiple configurations, multiple ways of going about that to enhance flexibility. Did you want to add something? Okay, just making sure. So yeah, they could also report as a sub of the MRF again, and then have the recycling activity as its own reporting entity if they wanted to. Or it could be part of the landfill again. So different options. Yeah, and if they wanted to, they could all be reporting entities. Just giving options as far as what's acceptable. They could all be reporting entities, meaning they could all file independent quarterly reports if they wanted to. So we talked about flexibility in terms of this. I see we're sort of approaching the end of our schedule, so I'm going to try to wrap this up. This is kind of I'm just going to provide some mock-ups and just kind of go over very quickly what all is required to successfully complete registration. So I think I previewed this, but when you log in, this is basically the home screen. It'll show all of the sites that you're associated with. Again, sites, there can be multiple reporting entities on a site, but these are like the physical locations that you would be in charge of reporting for. So, unless you run a large company that has a lot of locations, you may just have the one. And so you would hit select and go in. Sorry, let's just go through. You say, I want to create a brand new organization. Let's just assume you don't have any sites you're reporting for yet. You're wanting to initially register. So you would click create organization /site. I know that's a little small, but it's that plus up there. And it's going to take you to this page, and it has a bunch of form fields, and of course it's too small to be seen, so that's why I sort of blew it up a little bit. So the asterisk indicates fields that are a requirement. And we'll try to PDF, this registration aspect specifically and give a sort of a one-pager about, what fields are specifically required. But organization/site name, that's the name of the site, like John's Resource Recovery Complex. Calling code is like the international number, but I think in 99% of cases it'll just stay as 1 for US. Phone number, that's including area code and any applicable extensions. Check if it's mobile phone. Email, that is a required field as per the regulation, so we'll need that information. Organization/site DBA name, if applicable. The name of the parent company, if applicable. For instance, Waste Management. Operator company name would be the name of the company operating the facility, operation, or business. So that would be the operator name. If, for instance, if you had a solid waste facility permit, that would be the name that you would that you would use on this one too. Country is the country in which the facility is located. In the case of physical address, it's always going to be in the United States, or else there wouldn't be a reporting obligation, I don't think. Physical address, that's pretty straightforward. That's a required field. City, town, place is the name of the location in which the facility is sited, and it doesn't have to be an incorporated place. Mailing address, we asked that you use the USPS convention for that. State is a requirement for both fields. Postal code, 5-digit zip, so you can indicate that it's a mailing address, the same as physical. It will go in and autofill those as the same for the physical. Yeah, so here's where you put in your contact information. This is going to largely fill from the WebPass answers. It's going to ask similar questions: what's required, email, calling code, phone number. All right, now it's time to add reporting entities on the site. So we just talked about ways to do that. You would click Add Reporting Entity Activity. It's going to pop up this drop down for you to add one or more reporting entity activities. You'll type in the name, for instance, the name of the reporting entity, like John's MRF transfer station, if that's what it goes by, or DBA name if applicable, EPA ID if applicable, Swiss number if applicable. So you'll select the activity from this drop down, and we talked about the different reporting entity types already. So you would just indicate what you are and then hit save once you've put in that information, and also who has the signature authority for your business. So first name, last name, email, calling code, phone, those are all the required fields. Once you, I'll get to you in just a second. Once you are finished with all that, you'll hit save, and that's the end of it. And you've created your site and your reporting entities. So that's essentially how you would navigate the process. Yeah, let's go ahead and take you. Can you have more than one signature authority? I believe you can, right? It's more than one signature authority, or?
I think that the primary signature authority person would designate other people who could file the reports and such, but that one primary person is the one who's kind of taking responsibility for putting the other people in and designating their roles. So I don't know if we could have more than one. I don't know why we couldn't. I wish Peter was still here because he'd know right now, but we can check on that.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
The entity activities, as you were mentioning before, if we were going to have all of those activities reported under one DRS site, would you be able to click multiple in that drop-down box then?
You sure would. You would keep hitting that plus button for add reporting entity activity, and you would complete that pop-up several times for each reporting entity or reporting entity sub-activity that exists on the site.
Okay.
But I want to make sure that I understand the question because I think it might have gotten crossed. Do you mean to say that you want to aggregate multiple activities under one single reporting entity? In that case, you would select the lead reporting entities category, and then subsequently in a different screen, you would add the dependent activities and those types. So the lead is going to be something like a landfill or like a transfer processor, and then the recyclers you would add subsequently.
Okay, so I'm confused. If I have a site that is all managed by one DBA for one owner, and they have a transfer station on the left-hand side of their property, a MRF on the right-hand side of their property, a compost facility on the bottom of their property, and a CDI on the other side, and they all move waste in between each other, which one would I pick as my primary? They're all underneath the same solid waste facility permit, other than the composting.
So the transfer processor would be the lead. If you have two transfer processors, they've got to have separate RDRS numbers. Or if you have a landfill and a transfer processor, they have to have separate numbers. But if it's just one transfer processor and a bunch of recycler/composter type activities, those can all be under that one RDRS number that the transfer station would be the lead on.
All right, so we're a little bit over time, so if y'all need to trickle out, please feel free to do so. I think we'll just wrap it up with if there's anything else online.
Yeah, I think we have several questions online that we'll probably answer offline because a lot of them are not specific to this section. I have one from Joan Baker Warren, who is administrative assistant for the County of San Joaquin, Department of Public Works. And she is asking, we are currently reporting for transfer stations and landfills on behalf of the San Joaquin County. Are we responsible for notifying them of the new independent reporting requirement?
Well, I think it would be a big help if you did, but no, you're not mandated to do so. We would just, request that you inform them of the new regulations, and but ultimately it is up to the facility to make sure that they get into the system should they have a reporting obligation. But yeah, we would definitely appreciate your help with that.
Another question from Christine Williamson from Kern County Public Works. Will there be additional training explanations to those who are new to this reporting on jurisdictional determination, explaining that the city and their address is not necessarily their jurisdiction? As a county employee that receives data, I've seen many instances, not just this, where there is a misunderstanding about jurisdiction.
Hi, Christine. That's a great question. Yeah, so, it will be incumbent on the facility to make sure that, they get their physical address squared away and provided to us in a manner that actually reflects, the solid waste jurisdiction in which they are located. I know that, city and place boundaries, they can kind of be blurry. And so, happy to work with you. And I think the answer is yes, we will provide some explicit guidance in the system and, in the form of like a question mark for physical address, where we say like this should correspond to the solid waste jurisdiction in which it's located. And we currently have the ability to roll up place name to the appropriate solid waste jurisdiction. So if you enter, for instance, East Pasadena, it's going to, since that's not a city, it's going to, default that to LA unincorporated, just to give an example. But that, yes, we are looking into that very carefully.
And if if that was a question in relation to reporting as opposed to registration, the people who have to report jurisdiction of origin in the reports are still the disposal side folks, not the recycling side. So it's still the transfer stations and the landfills. So there shouldn't be new jurisdiction reporting requirements for anyone who isn't doing it now, I think.
So we have more questions, but a lot of them are very specific and not necessarily specific to the registration discussion we've had. Just for those who are watching, we will answer you, just not in this venue. And we also will be putting together FAQs that will be available later. So, these questions that we get consistently online will end up, in a publicly accessible document.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Sorry if we couldn't get to all of y'all's questions. We will follow up for the ones that we didn't review today, and we will be able to get you an answer. Then my contact information is up here, and we'll be posting the slides as well as a recording of this very shortly within the next couple of days or so. Also, I'm being down in Southern California doing this exact same thing that will also be webcast recorded. So thank you all so much for coming and bearing with me. Hope you all have a terrific rest of the day. Thank you.